Tuesday, July 30th, 2019. It is now 7 p.m. And if can we have, no, let's pledge of allegiance first. If everyone would join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Boy, talk about the nick of time. Roll call, please, Rudy.
Commissioner McGraw.
Here.
Chairwoman Nesser.
Present.
Commissioner Uli.
Here.
Commissioner Hanchey.
Present.
Vice Chair Heck.
Present.
Commissioner Howard.
Here.
Commissioner Kreidler.
Here.
7 present. We have a quorum, Madam Chair.
Okay, we'll move on to approval of the agenda. Can I have a motion?
Madam Chair,
Yes,
I move that the Planning and Zoning Commission accept the agenda as presented.
we have a motion. Can I have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Kreidler.
Yes.
Commissioner McGraw.
Yes.
Chairwoman Nesser.
Yes.
Commissioner Uli.
Yes.
Commissioner Hanchey.
Yes.
Vice Chair Heck.
Yes.
Commissioner Howard.
Yes.
So moved, Madam Chair.
Okay, we'll move on to the next item, old business, which is presentation and discussion of the proposed 2020 general plan.
Yeah. So,
Good evening, Commission. As mentioned in the last meeting, we're going to be reviewing the general plan Part 1 and parts of section Part 2, so chapters 1, 2, and 3 out of Part 2. We'll start with the first page that you guys have in front of you is just acknowledgements, of course, City Council, Planning Commission, City staff, pretty straightforward, and then we go to the table of contents. Larry, can I get the
full
keyboard?
screen? Oh.
Yeah, no, the keyboard, thanks.
Yeah.
So as I just mentioned, we're going to go through the Part 1 executive summary. We're going to go through the community vision and mission statements, the introduction and community profile, and like I mentioned in the meeting, in the last meeting, the community participation dates will be done at the very end. So those will be added at the end of the plan because we don't know exactly when we're meeting going forward. And then we'll go through plan elements, environmental plan element number 1, chapter number 1. We're going to go through chapter number 2, parks, recreation, and open space, and then chapter number 3, neighborhood preservation, revitalization, and the housing element. We're going to go to the executive summary now. And I'm sorry, I didn't ask. Does everybody have a copy of their general plan with them? If not, we have copies. Okay, great. The executive summary is just really a brief overview of what the plan will look like. It includes each of the planning elements and the goals at the end of the chapter. It doesn't include the policies. The policies are specific to the chapter, but it'll provide the overall goals for each of the planning elements. Upon your review, did any of the commissioners have any questions of the executive summary? Any comments? Okay.
Motion to adjourn.
Yes. Yeah. So with that said, then we will go through the community vision and mission statements, so it's straightforward. I don't think we have anything to talk about there, but we'll go through the introduction and community profile. So we've broken down this section really in a few sections, you could say. What is a general plan? Why do we need a general plan? And it kind of notes the state mandate and the chapters that need to be addressed within the plan, and then the general plan organization notes what is a goal and what is a policy. So each of the elements have that structure at the very end, specific to what it's speaking about. And then what is the general plan impact? We have verbiage there along with community demographics that was taken from the U.S. Census Bureau. So we cover everything from population growth, population projections, ethnic composition, educational attainment, poverty level, medium household income, housing type, medium home value, and then the top 10 employers. So it really just paints the picture of what our community is broken down into. Then we go into how data was gathered. So we talk a little bit about how this plan was developed and the surveys and the meetings that we attended to, and the findings of those surveys. At the end, we have kind of a summary of what the survey talked about in terms of comments from the people that took them. We have appearance of the community. We have lack of businesses and shopping opportunities, homelessness, and at-risk communities. So those were the major concerns from the survey takers. And then we have planning considerations that break down as overall challenges, considerations noting housing, workforce, and then the planning and development south of Baseline Avenue. So this section really just covers a lot, covers really the whole, everything from community participation to demographics to specific areas like the south of Baseline Avenue. Did any of the commissioners have any comments or questions regarding this part?
Madam Chair.
Yes.
I noticed that some of the figures, I know they were taken from the U.S. Census Bureau, but I was kind of curious about them. Table 1.1 showing the 2018-2019 estimated population of 41,739.
Mm-hmm.
And then table 1.2 has the 2020 at 40,458.
Correct.
So I'm just curious, how did that come about? I know it's estimated, but
Sure. So
it's showing a decrease.
Absolutely. So Commissioner Kryler, the U.S. Census Bureau is broken down into a 10-year segment, and in part of the U.S. Census Bureau, some of the data is attained annually. Population and housing is taken annually. So this population estimate was done in 2018. So that's a kind of a closer figure. When it came to the population projections, that was done in the last census section. So that's why they differ. So it looks like we're even, as of now, we're a little bit ahead of what the projections were the last time they did this census.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. The other question I had is on table 1.3. And the total percentages,
Sure.
or percentage of the total, Apache Junction comes out to 100%, but when
Right.
it comes to Pinal County and the state of Arizona,
Right.
we're looking at 127 and 128% respectively. And
Right.
how were those same kind of thing for the Census Bureau coming up with those numbers, or?
Correct. So all the information was taken from the Census Bureau, and what I understand how they note those figures is sometimes they have overlapping. So someone might identify as white and Hispanic and things like that. So there might be, you might be in two groups, and that's why you're over 100.
I was wondering if that might be the case, but I wanted to have that clarified. Thank you.
Absolutely. Anyone else regarding this section? All right, with that said, we'll move on to, I believe it's chapter 1 now. Yep, chapter 1, energy and environmental plan and element. So another broad chapter. Any thoughts or questions? I'm sure you guys read it thoroughly. Every word.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, okay.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Some of these, as far as the goals and policies, I don't know if we just don't want to jump right in, but you asked
Sure. Yeah.
about any comments. Yes, I
Absolutely.
did in fact read these. I highlighted some things and some questions. 1.1 at 1B, the clustering residential units. I know from working in the city for a long time that a lot of people don't want to be clustered together, especially in the east part of town. So I'm kind of curious as to why we would even want to be doing that, considering that, and providing a density bonus for utilizing that, since the public, as I've spoken to them, don't want that.
Sure. Commissioner Crowley, I think this is more of a recommendation of clustering those residential units. When it comes to planning practices, especially in our eastern boundary area, it is my understanding that we want to kind of have that, green loop around the city. And by clustering that, it would least affect kind of that eastern and northern loop.
Okay, so
Part of the other part of this, if I could, was when we get to the land use element, it might be reinforced there, but one of the things we're looking at it on the state land, forever, all the meetings we've been to, whether it was on the active transportation plan and even for this document, that square mile that includes the BLM land that is under lease for the recreation lease, on either side of that are BLM lands, state trust lands. Right now in the general plan, it calls for, I think it's RSGR, 1.25 units on an acre. So we're recommending, which is allowed in the state statute, is actually take the state land that's in that square mile between McKellips and Lost Dutchman for some of the state land to actually be zoned conservation, or to have the land use category conservation. But what the state statute says, if you're going to designate it conservation, you have to increase the density from 1.25 units an acre to 1. And what we're saying is, in those areas, rather than have 1 acre lots, you can't really sewer them, you can't really, it's not economical. So if you want to try to preserve that space, you either have to buy it from the state, or you could cluster those units. I'm getting back to the clustering point. So say the state had, I forget how many acres they had, maybe say it's 1,200 acres, that's 1,200 units. Well, maybe to try to preserve some of that open space, you could cluster those units on, and say it's a 100-acre parcel. So wouldn't it be better to try to get this 100 units on 50 acres rather than everybody have an acre lot?
okay.
So clustering could happen south of the 60, but I'm giving you the specific example. So the Y area, as we call it, that is from Goldfield to the west and from Apache Trail and Old West Highway, we're still calling it low-density residential. There's some multifamily zoned in there, so we're not recommending clustering in there. But what we are talking about is if a developer wanted to get a density bonus south of the 60, or maybe in that swath that goes from Silly Mountain up to the northeast and then west over to Meridian, on the state land especially, I think people want to preserve that in its entirety. We hear a lot of folks saying we should never develop that state land or the BLM land. So we was looking at a plan, I think it was from the city, maybe it was in the 80s or 90s, that actually showed that land use category as like a conservation land use. Over time, it got designated as low-density residential. What I'm saying is, in the state statute, says you can call it conservation, but you actually have to have the density, not an acre and a quarter lot, but 1 acre. So anyway, that's a long answer to the question, but it is different in this plan that we're going back to calling that state land in that it's almost 12 square miles conservation.
Okay, and that's understandable when you put it like that.
So it's not a blanket thing, I think, so.
Yeah, understood. So thank you for clarifying that part.
And again, you could add language here. This is, your time to input. You could say clustering residential units. You could say where appropriate, or where something like that, if you wanted to have a qualifying statement to it.
Yeah, I think that would be good as far, because I wouldn't really want to put a hard limitation on something, saying, no, we can't do it here, but we can do it here, kind of thing. But where appropriate, I think is a good, kind of covers things and makes it, kind of leaves it up to you, I guess, as far as making it appropriate, or to the commission.
Yeah, you could have areas that are not necessarily designated floodplain, but maybe they're flood prone. So in theory, the developer could put units on them, but maybe we want to take the units that they could have had and cluster them to leave a broader, riparian floodplain area, or flood prone area, if you want to call it that.
Sure.
So there might be some areas that haven't even been designated floodplain yet. If we're trying to keep those areas as open space, maybe the developer doesn't lose density there, but they just transfer that density within their same ownership, but, so they cluster it in a way that they get the same number of units, but maybe they've preserved some open space feature or something.
Okay, and actually, you bring up the riparian, I kind of had that under 1.4 is the recreate habitats along washes, like Siphon Draw or Weeks Wash or something like that. So, and my other question was low-impact development practices. I'm not exactly sure what that entails. Is that, could I get a description of that or an example?
Yeah, we're actually gonna have folks from ASU, City of Scottsdale. The city participated in preparation of what's called a low-impact development handbook. It mainly deals with stormwater pollution. In other words, you know, when the water comes off the roof, you could use it for landscaping water. In the parking lots, when the first flush happens and you're taking all the oils and greases, rather than putting them into a wash right away, you want to put them into some sort of bioswale or something like that. So a lot of other states are kind of ahead of us on this, but I think WIFA, I forget the name of that fund, the Water something fund, I don't know if that's a DEQ's money or where that money comes from. Do you know where WIFA? I think we borrowed money there for the new water plant. What is WIFA?
That's through the state, and that is through a DWR.
Okay, so WIFA funded with other partners, City of Scottsdale. We kind of put our staff, Emil and Sam, on the committee, but they developed for Maricopa County this low-impact development kind of standards handbook. So it's more than just desert landscaping. It's trying to deal with stormwater on site rather than sending it downstream.
Okay.
So trying to have less pavement, more trees, you know, using, like here in our parking lot, you can even see a micro example. You'll see a curb cut where the water's flowing through the parking lot, then there'll be a gap in the curb, and then that water flows off the parking lot into not a retention basin, but maybe something that's going to filter out some pollutants. So that's kind of the idea.
And
Okay.
if you had porous pavement out there, it would be better.
Porous pavement is another form of low impact development, but it mainly deals with water quality. I think other folks are trying to do it with quantity as well. You know, storing as much water as you can on site with rain gardens or whatever.
Okay, thank you.
That was in which goal or?
It's 1.1.
Madam Chair, Madam Chair.
Low impact was goal 1.3,
Okay,
and then the recreating the habitat, as far as like riparian, was 1.4.
right. So when you see, well, I guess there's an acronym there, LID. It's further explained in other parts, but Yeah.
It looked like it might have
Yeah.
application elsewhere, but
yeah,
since we came upon it, I wasn't real sure what it was.
okay.
Figured I'd bring it up tonight, and
All
I'll
right.
know in the future.
Yeah, okay. And again, I was gonna say that, that study that the city participated in, I was gonna try to have that presented to the council some night at a work session, so that'd be where they can present that whole workbook. So,
Okay, thank you.
Peter?
City, I have a question. And I didn't see it addressed here, maybe elsewhere. One of the challenges that occurs on the trail is that floodplain issue on the north side of the trail, that I know there's some businesses there that they are struggling because the cost to mitigate that would be substantial. And it seems like we have just kind of just let it ride, if you will. I don't know if there's something, is that being looked at? Is there any,
well, I was gonna say, the water element deals a little bit with floodplain,
okay.
so, There
It's
is-
further on, that's okay, I just didn't.
yeah. In the stormwater element, there's already some discussions happening with Public Works right now of acquiring some undeveloped land, try to, again, slow the water down upstream, so we would have, even though these flood control structures are north of Lost Dutchman, Maricopa County flood control structures, south of there, all of a sudden it starts raining and all of a sudden we have all these problems. So there is some talk about either working on this county land off of Scenic There's potential there. That is Goldfield Wash, perhaps to slow some of the water there and maybe acquiring. So the city acquired that site over on Tomahawk and 4th Avenue, I think, from Mrs. O'Malley. That's another example of where the city's trying to be a little proactive, trying to hold some of this water back. So, but to redo that, we would need to hold back enough water, because it's a ponding area,
Right, right.
where that Apache Trail acts like a dam. So basically, you gotta figure out how much water are we trying to contain in a basin. And we're looking at, even on the site for Dutch Bros, that site, largely, except for Dutch Bros is going, is in a H zone, I think it is, AH zone, where it's a ponding area, less than a foot, but in order to develop that site, they gotta figure out where to hold that
Hold that
water.
water, right.
Circle K had to deal with the same thing, the new Circle K at Ironwood and the trail. So they essentially put the building in the back, put the pumps up front, so that they, which most gas stations do, but they had to deal with that ponding area. But until the city figures out a way to hold some water further upstream, it's a 2012 map, FEMA map, so you basically have to figure out a kind of a regional solution. But it is a hindrance to development, or redevelopment, if you will. Scuttlebutts is another example of trying to find a use.
Down in a ditch.
They kind of have to deal with the floodplain regulations and remodeling, and only, doing 50% of the value for a remodel, things like that. So I don't know, I mean, it might not be a bad thing to specifically address, I don't remember in here specifically saying
Not in this chapter.
deal, not in this chapter, but maybe in the stormwater chapter, we could talk a little bit more about floodplains.
Okay, good, that's good, okay.
Larry, I want to talk a little bit more on what Steve brought up about the 1.11B, the clustering. I know, we all know about the land that, the 7 shape that runs across the top of the city and down by Silly Mountain on the east side. And you know why we want to keep that open. We know. But how, if we don't specify more exact information, where is it that future generations, 20 years from now, they're going to know why we didn't open that up or want it to be built, and we want it to remain open land?
I think it's in that
It's in the
zone
land.
compatibility table in the
It's
land
also-
use.
It is, yes, it's in
Okay.
the land use chapter.
So it is in
Correct.
some place, okay.
So that's why we gave you the Post-it notes and
Yeah,
all that.
okay.
So make a flag there but that's kind of where we were trying to get back to, is that an old plan called it that. Somehow we've called it low-density development. But if we want to call it conservation, I think we're allowed to, even though it's state land. We just have to say the density is 1 unit an acre. So it actually gives them higher density, but it also kind of at the same time says, hey, we're really thinking about this as permanent open space. And I think it's kind of one of the fundamentals of this whole plan, is that that's what's going to make AJ different than other communities. What community around here is going to have a 7 or
Yeah.
11 square miles of, now the BLM could always trade the land or swap it out or whatever, but I think that's really what, 50 years from now, people will say, that's what's cool about AJ, you've got this 11 square miles of open space that nobody has.
Yeah, because I was with Parks and Rec on that when we worked on, the thought of if we could buy it, a quarter of a mile on either side of the lot, or the boundary line. I forget how many millions that was gonna cost, but for horses and trails
Well,
and
again, I think,
everything.
people hate when I bring up Snobsdale, but they've spent over $1 billion
Yeah,
acquiring the McDowell Sonoran Conservancy. So private developers pitched in, but the city taxpayers have paid to acquire a lot of state land and link it with some other federal land. So, I mean, as the city matures, those are things, if you really want to protect it, you're really going to have to buy it.
yeah,
And
Okay.
so, this kind of maybe sets the stage for that. And you kind of say, well, we've got 20,000 acres south of the US 60 that's state land. Some of that maybe, the washes and things can be preserved, but this, I think, to kind of keep the character of this area, that's kind of fundamental to the land use element, so we'll be revisiting that when we get to that.
Okay,
Madam Chair?
yes.
Larry, I don't know if you can answer this, but where are we at as far as obtaining land from either BLM or state trust?
In this particular area?
Just within the city limits right now, I know
Well, the
there's,
city has just re-upped all the leases. Those are the RMPP, I think, leases, they're park and recreation leases for the rodeo grounds, for Prospector Park. It's really, I think those leases were for 25 years renewed. Joel,
Some
is
of
that-
them were.
Huh?
Some of them were.
Some of them more. So the idea that the feds are gonna turn around anytime soon and sell us that land, it's something that I think the city's working on, but there's no guarantee that the feds would necessarily sell us the land.
okay.
And there's some land, some of this you'll see on some maps, some of it we lease, and some of it we don't lease. So mainly the lease, the recreation lease is under the power lines.
Right,
But there's other BLM land that's not. In terms of the state land, there's been no discussion that I know of us buying any state land up in that area. I mean,
Okay.
even here where we sit, we had to go through an auction process to buy 11 acres, I believe, for this campus. So, there's been no discussion of, going behind the Boys and Girls Club or on other state land.
okay, so we're not actively pursuing anything like that or hearing anything?
The city itself?
Yes,
Well, I think the BLM, there's been some discussions, the mayor particularly, about acquiring the rodeo grounds so that there could be events there that, that aren't necessarily related to nonprofit. So it's kind of like the BLM land, where the county annex is here, that's still BLM land. It's a patent, long-term patent, I believe. So the county doesn't even own the land underneath those county buildings across the road. Then there's another 22 or so acres that could be recreation, but it has to serve like a government or nonprofit interest, I believe is how it works. So that's kind of how the rodeo grounds. So everything that happens at the rodeo grounds has to be kind of public benefit, public good, because it's federal land. So if the city were to own it, then yes, the city would have a little more discretion of how it's used,
Would be really good.
so.
Yeah, because for 20 years, there's been a plan for the exhibit hall and
Oh, yeah.
the tractor pull and everything on that land up there, but we can't do any of it because it's BLM.
I
and we
think in
can't-
actuality, we were doing the impact fee, development fees here, there's, the only land the city has as park and recreation open space is Flatiron Park, I think it's called,
Flatiron. It's
Flatiron Park. Joel calls it Flatiron, because it should be 2 words. Anyway, that's the only land we have as the city itself, that's the only land we have for parkland, the rest is all on leased land.
It's either state trust land or SALT or
BLM.
school
That's
or
BLM, no,
BLM.
Silver
Yeah,
Mountains BLM, Prospectors BLM.
we don't
the
own any
school,
of the land. or-
Yeah, the school, the skate park, the pool, that's on
State trust land.
school land. Yeah. So again, that's one of the next elements coming up here, I think, isn't it? Parking.
Parks, chapter.
Yeah.
just
Yeah,
parks.
so maybe there's time to add language or statements or policies of, again, you don't have to do everything at, this meeting. You come up with a policy statement or idea and you want to bring it up at a subsequent meeting when we get through the elements, that's what the Post-it notes and all that were for.
Okay.
Anyone else regarding this chapter?
Yes, I do.
Commissioner Oley?
Madam Chair,
Yeah.
on goal 1.6, we're talking about green building ordinances and practices there. Larry, are you getting around to things like green roofs and things of that nature in this particular, that's sort of a conservation thing as well?
Well, we have in the zoning code now, a green building section in there, but there's not a lot of meat in there. So the city has tried to lead by example with this building being LEED certified in the MGC. Most cities have made green building like an optional, or where they'll score a building, but so then they can tell the developer, that your building would meet these kind of points, but not mandate it. So I don't know that the city's ready to do that. I guess that would be in the zoning code. But, so the idea was beef up what we have. There's just a, and you'll see it when we do the zoning code here soon, is you'll see that chapter on green building. There's just, and there's various green building codes too. There's LEED, there's some others too, but that's really what that is. And again, promoting it could be awareness, whether we, say, well, we're not gonna let you build your Dutch Brothers unless it's LEED platinum. I don't know that we would go there. I mean, themselves, a developer knows that they should do green because it's gonna save them money. If they're gonna own it for a long period of time, it makes sense for them to do it. But so most cities, I think, do optional. There are very few cities that mandate that you have to build buildings to meet. I mean, there's an energy code that you have to meet, but a green building code, again, be a point system and all that. So we could come up with one and still make it optional. That's kind of what a lot of, Sydney, I don't know if you have what Mesa or Queen Creek or others do, but.
What I've seen in other municipalities is if a builder elects to do a green building per se, then the city would acknowledge, the building with a plaque or some sort of public recognition.
And I have one final question on goal 1.8, where we're looking at reducing the amount of solid waste. That kind of ties into where is the city with respect to the requirement for solid waste pickup by one provider.
I believe that the schedule is to have the council be updated on September 5th and 6th, or just the 6th?
Just the 6th.
The 6th. So the city put out a request for proposals, got 3 back, and those were evaluated by a city staff work group and make recommendations, and those recommendations come forth to the council on September 6th. And then that recommendation may be to go negotiate a contract with one of the 3 companies that submitted. So can't tell you who the best one was at this time, but so the idea, I believe, would be to start service in March. And so between awarding a contract with a selected provider, and we have to update the ordinance that goes with that to mandate, to make sure that everybody has to have their garbage picked up in front of their house. So that would kind of come together, and then if it goes forward, I mean, the council could reject all the bids, et cetera, but the intent is to start citywide with one provider in March. But there's also some nuances relates to HOAs. Some HOAs have a 1 or 2 or 3 year contract, so we got to kind of figure that out. They already have a provider. So some HOAs have, gone through their own bidding process, picked a provider. So we can't just say, okay, on March 1st, even if you have a contract with company X, you now have to do it with A. So some of those things have to get worked out.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, just one more quick question. I saw the plan of phasing out free dump week. I realize it's not for a while yet, but I always thought that was kind of one of those things that would reduce the amount of illegal dumping, because people then wouldn't choose to just go out in the desert and dump stuff every which way. Is Republic Services, is it for them, is it
It's in the contract right now. The city updated its contract when they came in and did the rezoning, if you were on the board at the time. And so part of that includes, so the contract itself goes to, well, I don't even know, I guess 2035 is when the landfill would close. But so in theory, free dump week would happen then. But this new RFP and whoever the one provider would be, they're going to have monthly bulk pickup. That's part of the RFP.
Oh.
So if everybody can put their couch at the curb, there might not be a need. I think you'll see the volumes go down on free dump week over time, because right now people store 12 weeks of garbage in their backyard, and whatever they don't burn or bury, every 12 weeks they take their vehicle to the landfill.
Right.
So if everybody has to have garbage collection, I just think you'll see volumes go
All
down.
right, all right, that makes
So
sense.
plus if you have bulk pickup, I think although the option is anybody can go to the landfill anytime they want. It's just now you pay, you know, $40 a ton
Yeah,
or
oh, I
whatever.
realize, it's not, it's relatively.
And it's cheaper, just,
you know.
it's cheaper to have someone come to your house
Yes.
and
Oh,
take
I
your
will.
garbage away than for you to drive,
Absolutely.
yeah. So I don't know. Because they have restrictions on free dump week. You can't have it, it's like a conventional load. You
Right.
can't just like load it up over the top either.
Yeah,
They don't
yeah.
accept that.
And it will give us cleaner roads and streets.
Yeah, you'll have fewer vehicles on the street, and I think you won't have people just leaving stuff out at the curb forever, so. So I guess I guess maybe the big, 2025, I'm just trying to remember what the policy rationale for ending it was, but I think it's just having everybody go to the landfill and having stuff blow all over the road and as they're getting it down to the dump. But the actual, we may not even be able to do this, because like I said, the contract goes to 2035, I believe, and it includes free dump week in the contract, so we'd have to amend that contract. So another alternative would be if we eliminated free dump week, the citizens are the ones using it, but if you renegotiate it, the city itself is allowed to take so many 5,000 tons, I believe it is, every year that we can take to the landfill. So maybe that's another trade-off. If we negotiate the contract, if free dump week were to go away, maybe the city would increase that to 7 or 10 or something like that, so.
Larry, in this contract that for reducing 3 providers down to 1 that the city's involved with, is the city going to retain any rights to be like other commissions where they can, the provider has to come to them for an increase like they do with electricity and all like that? They can't just up their rates without,
Well, there's the CPI in there, so they'd have to substantiate, you know, you generally, when you do an 8-year contract,
okay,
I think might have 2 one-year renewals, that you have to use an appropriate CPI for the area. So I don't know which exact CPI is included there, but if, you know, the CPI is 1%, you can't raise your rates 3%, you know.
I mean, I was just wondering because my garbage provider just jumped my rates up, and I called them up and I said, you either lower them or I'm going to somebody else. We've got free enterprise here going, but if we're gonna lose that, now we've got one provider, I don't have any backing to say, I'll go to somebody else if there's nobody else to go to.
Right.
So I just wanted to
Well, I
know
think
how
the
it was being
idea-
controlled.
The idea is, and again, it's all gonna be public acknowledged here when it comes out, but the idea is, instead of having the 3 providers, some people not even having service, that if you have a fixed contract with 11,000 customers, then that should reflect in the bid.
Okay.
Any move
No.
for the city to develop its own Department of Public Works?
Well, we have a public
We have
works
a public
department, but
works.
not
But I
a
mean-
trash
but I mean-
utility.
But I mean, when we
Waste
go
management.
into
Sewer and
providing waste, the upkeep of the roads
All
and
this,
streets,
well, we have
water department, the whole 9 yards, Department of Public Works.
we do have a Department of Public Works.
And I know we do. I
Yeah.
know we do, but it only takes care of the highways and the byways and the streets. And I'm talking about where we're going to have under one roof, where we have garbage disposal, waste disposal, water provider, streets, roads, that whole 9 yards.
So, the solid waste, they're gonna manage this contract, so Public Works will manage this new contract. And it takes if you're saying we're gonna have a utility, that takes a vote of the people
Okay.
for us to
Okay.
acquire the water district or acquire
Yep.
the sewer district. So ultimately, I think that's now thought about being on a ballot in 2022.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And typically, those utilities are under a public works director,
Yes.
rather than their own department. They're usually kind of consolidated. So most cities have water, sewer, solid waste, stormwater, all under
Exactly.
public works, along with streets and whatever. Okay, half of you are on the Parks and Rec Commission, so what do you think of the next element? I don't know.
I'm not on that commission.
You're not on that
I'm not
commission?
either anymore.
Well, those appointments are coming up, so you could all,
Oh, Madam
but
Chair.
some of you
Yes.
are, I think. I was,
Larry, there's a goal 1.7,
Are you,
number 3. What is the reasoning behind this, other than slowing down emissions?
it is air quality, basically.
We live in a 110-degree temperature, and if somebody's sitting in their car waiting on something for 5 minutes or more, they're going to get penalized for that? Is that what this is saying?
Generally, it relates to trucks,
Commercial.
commercial trucks. It doesn't necessarily say that, but
So can we
Most
put
ordinances
in
deal with-
commercial vehicles in there?
pardon me?
Can we add commercial vehicles in there so we're not addressing the general public?
You certainly can. But just so you're aware, there are states where it's 80 below, and they also say you can't just leave your car
No,
running.
that's their
So
problem.
I'm just telling you that there are, for that same reason, for air quality, it's even,
Is that a real problem, that it needs to be in here for this,
well,
City?
there's a lot of
idling
kids
cars?
growing up with asthma now because of air quality, so, I mean, air quality is a huge deal, and it's not just dust, but it's other particulate matter and,
but I don't know if you'd want to limit it to just commercial vehicles, because if you do,
Well, my opinion is it seems overreaching.
Well,
I know you know other
I mean, if you're
cities do
sitting in
that.
your car, that's one thing, you're in the car. I think the idea is you leave your car running so that the air conditioner's on while you're in Fry's. That's what we're saying. You can't just have an unoccupied vehicle without somebody in it.
So unoccupied would probably be the key term in this
Yeah,
statement.
I think so.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, and a lot of them, like industrial parks, you'll have, you gotta have a refrigerator going, for a reefer truck, but you don't leave the diesel engine running all night. So that's when you're sleeping in the sleeper unit, you got the air conditioner running. So those are the types of, it's really unoccupied, I think, is
I think,
mainly
yeah,
what
if
you're.
we can
Yeah.
add that to it, I think that would.
that sounds
Yeah,
good.
but if you do have somebody sleeping in a truck.
Yeah,
it
then
would
you
be
have the
unoccupied.
sleep
They
in
need
the
air
work
conditioner,
truck
I guess,
overnight.
but.
Or is
So it's a
there-
noise thing too for trucks. People do have complaints if someone's, idling their truck all night because they got the sleeper, they're in the sleeper cab, but. So implement a no idling ordinance, would we say, for unoccupied?
That prohibits unoccupied vehicles from idling more than,
5 minutes.
But then what about a semi where a guy's sleeping in the sleeper?
Yeah,
well, he's
He's
occupied.
occupied, I guess.
so he can
Like that.
sleep in there with his truck idling all night long?
Then it's just more of a nuisance complaint from a
He's doing
noise
his
from a
job.
neighbor, but we typically don't allow semi-tractors in neighborhoods anyway, so. There's a weight limit, so there shouldn't be a complaint in a residential area of somebody running their tractor all night. But- Okay,
Thank you.
prohibits unoccupied, okay.
Okay,
Are we ready to move on to chapter 2?
everybody?
Okay, so chapter 2 is Parks and Recreation Open Space. We have the introduction, we have some verbiage noting about the funding mechanism for parks, and then we break it down, parks by classification, so what type of parks, mini parks, neighborhood parks, community parks, and then we have our special use facilities, just like the MGC and the rodeo grounds. And we also talk about the trail system, there's some basins that we talk about, and then we talk about some regional parks as well, such as Lost Dutchman State Park, Usery Mountain Park that is nearby, and the Tonto National Forest. And then at the end of the chapter, we have the goals and policies. Do any of the commissioners have comments regarding this chapter?
And for those of you, who's on the park board here? Nobody here is on the park board anymore? You used to be on the park
I
board?
used to.
Oh, Well, I thought Liz kind of ran this chapter through the park board, so
Yeah.
I thought maybe some of you were on the park board, sorry. So I think they have seen it, just in case you're curious.
Okay, looks like we don't have any comments on that chapter. We can move on to chapter 3, which is really the housing element. So we have the intro, we have the table 3.1 that notes the type of housing that is noted through our survey that was taken in 2018. It looks like the majority of our housing stock is in manufactured and RV homes. I think it's totals about 62 or 63%, with site-built homes totaling about 31, and then the remainder of that is multifamily. So it talks about that imbalance there of housing types. It also talks about affordability in this chapter, housing affordability. And it notes about, it also notes a few of the studies, such as the Active Transportation Plan, the ASU Sustainability Plan, and then some of the actions that we've taken, such as the impact fee study, noting housing. And then at the end, of course, we have the goals and policies as well. Any comments regarding this chapter?
Madam Chair? Looking at the, actually, the definitions for mobile homes, manufactured home, modular home, I know a lot of those are interchanged quite frequently, but do we have any actual definitions anywhere in code or policy with the breakdown? Because I know mobile homes of today or of yesterday would not necessarily be compatible with manufactured homes of today, but now they're actually interchangeable, and yet modular homes are kind of in the same category as a regular stick-built home.
Yeah, the new building codes that we just adopted, the 2018 ICC building codes, the administrative chapter, the administrative policy that goes with Chapter 7 in the City Code of Ordinances, so it's Volume 1, Chapter 7, there's definitions in there for manufactured home, modular home, recreational vehicle, what a HUD unit is, what a pre-HUD unit is, and what a HUD, what do you call it, a HUD modified, or, you know, something that's over 400 square feet, about 600 square feet. So those are all, and those aren't online yet because we just adopted them back in June.
Okay.
So we don't put those same definitions in here, but they are codified in Chapter 7.
Okay.
And in the zoning code too, as we update that, like we have a whole section in the zoning code about manufactured homes, and there are definitions in the zoning code. What we'll try to do is make sure those two sync up.
Okay.
And generally they do. Well, what is a park model versus what is a HUD certified manufactured home and a modular home. A modular home is a factory built stick building, and you can put it on any site in the city.
Okay.
So it's treated as if it's a site-built home, a modular home.
Okay. The reason I brought that up is because I saw property taxes, and over 3,000 manufactured homes pay no property tax, so I wasn't sure if that's...
Those are the ones that are not, have gone through the process in the assessor's office to affix the site. So you have manufactured homes, say you put a manufactured home on a parcel in 1970, and it was in the county, it was not in the city, so that property is not affixed through that process. Now, they may have added an Arizona room that got a permit, so when someone's paying Pinell County property tax, they're only paying on the Arizona room because the Arizona room is kind of stick-built, it's attached to the ground. So estimates are that there's about 3,000 manufactured homes in the city that are not affixed, and I think you can affix and unaffix fairly quickly. So you have about 3,000 properties, that manufactured homes in the city. They don't pay fire district tax, they don't pay school district tax, they don't pay Pinell County property tax.
Simply
but
because
their
they're
Arizona room might,
Simply because they're not affixed.
because they're not affixed. They're treated like a vehicle.
They pay their annual taxes just like a car.
As a trailer, yeah.
Yep.
Don't-
So that's a
doesn't the-
pointing out an inequity that's really the state needs to fix it,
Okay.
but
When it's
for,
not property tax, I'm like, well, we don't have property tax in the city, so what exactly are we saying here?
it's the property tax that you pay to the county and the fire district and the school district.
But, and we have 3,000 of those roughly in the city that are not supporting,
The
Anything.
schools,
They don't pay any
fire.
of that.
Right.
They pay nothing.
Yeah.
Unless they have an Arizona room, then they are through their Arizona room.
Okay.
Or something that got a permit. Again, maybe they built a garage, a detached garage, and that, the assessor, knows it's there and it's on the assessor card and they pay property tax on
Madam
that.
Chair?
Yeah.
Larry, I'm going to take off for a little second here. Redevelopment of aging mobile home parks. Is there somewhere where I can find out what that means in any of our policies or procedures or statutes? Or can something tell me what that means about redevelopment of aging mobile home parks?
Yes, so we have about 28 to 30 of these parks that are probably non-conforming. They existed before the city was a city. So they're non-conforming as to, they don't have the 10 acres to create a mobile home park. But we have many in the city that their electrical systems are bad. We had one they were trying to sell it, where the SRP lines are dangling so low that an emergency vehicle could not get in. And so then they were looking for the city, the fire district, to come and say, how do you get these guys to upgrade and raise the wires and upgrade all the wires? We had an ASU student work on this recently. She presented to the council and had some policy recommendations in her graduate study, if you will. So code enforcement could work, maybe creating some minimal standards. We have a lot of older, what are called, an RV park where, and again, you can see some of these in the southwest part of the city where you might have a house and in the backyard they might have 7 RVs. So those are the things, there's no place for people to barbecue, there's no grass, there's no picket fence, there's no mailbox. I mean, it just, maybe there's some minimal standards that we could try to employ. So that's the idea of maybe some of these we've had where the septic systems are failing. Maybe someone goes in and buys it out, and Rudy hates this when I say this, but maybe it's a tiny home community. I mean, it already is a tiny home community, but maybe instead of having 15 RVs in there, maybe it's 15, maybe it's a little tiny platted subdivision and everybody would get a stick-built house that meets some sort of code, but it would be a way to redevelop the parks to keep them affordable, but also, and they're really just tough to keep a whole track of. We have people moving units in that are pre-HUD without permits. We're catching them. It's been discussed 2 decades ago about having a person that's a code officer that all they do is deal with the parks. So we have some parks, very high-end, have golf courses in them, obviously. They have, very nice, but we also have some that are aging and try to come up with a solution. And maybe the solution, there was a discussion in her report about an overlay district, and maybe there's an overlay zoning we could put on these that would help them come up with a way to revitalize them. So that's, I don't know, my working definition of what. And I think at the count, we had about 28 to 30 that she looked at. Maybe there's a few more. We have some that are in the floodway, so we have entire mobile home or RV park that's in Weeks Wash that today would not even be allowed to be built there. And so that thing should just be picked up and moved. But so we have, I think, 9 parks, either RV or mobile home parks that are in the floodplain. So maybe not, some of them aren't in the floodway, some units may be. So that's kind of an area for, revitalization. But mainly we're talking about, you could give an example, on Gold Drive, just south of Superstition, on the west side of the road. That is a park that's been there before the city was a city. There's a house in there, a manufactured home, and then a number of RVs in there. And they need code enforcement, would be the first thing they need. But these parks change hands all the time. So the idea of her study, what are some tools we could employ that might incent a new investor to do something different with the property.
If, well, then Larry, if they're changing, you're saying changing hands, that means changing ownership. Is there not a way to implement some requirement then with a change of ownership that they have to comply with whatever this?
Well, if there is
Modernization.
some of these have letters of lawful nonconformity, and if it, basically, an owner, one or two or three owners ago, or the current owner, if they've owned it in the family, they can come to the city and say, hey, this park's been here since 1965. We have 3 apartments, we have 17 sites. So they'll have a house, then they might have a duplex, the one I'm thinking in particular, and then they'll have X number of sites, and it's non-conforming. They're grandfathered, so to speak, for X number of units. So they have that letter, and then we'll find out, well, somebody snuck in 3 more units, and suddenly, when it goes for sale, the new buyer, well, so what we're doing now is going through a process of recording at the register, or the recorder's office, county recorder's office, those letters of nonconformity. So a new buyer puts them on notice, there's a document over there that says, hey, this thing is grandfathered for 1 house, 2 apartments, and 13 RVs. But overall, it's non-conforming, because none of the units meet the new setbacks, et cetera, et cetera.
So the city
So-
doesn't maintain a registry itself for these kinds of situations?
We have a mobile home park inventory from 1990-something? 96. But a lot of these parks never had site plans.
Okay,
They were built before the city was a city, and then when they want to do something, that's when Rudy, either we do a letter of lawful nonconformity or try to get them to do a site plan, because if you don't have a site plan, how do you verify whether they are allowed to have that 1 more unit in there? So we go through, it's 63% of our housing stock, so we're dealing quite a bit with these various parks, and,
Can you not,
we're trying to encourage new units to go in, but some just need to be redeveloped, get on the city sewer system instead of having, 7 septic tanks for 21 units or whatever's in there.
when you do the recording now, you're saying you're doing that now?
Yeah, so
Can
what
you-
we did was we started with 2018, and we're kind of working backwards and recording.
Okay.
Because
you not-
sometimes the code changed, and we're trying to say, okay, if we did a letter of lawful nonconformity in 2004, maybe the code changed, and that affected the letter of lawful so we're looking at every single letter of lawful nonconformity that was ever done since 1978, or whenever we started, 1985, and go through and record them so that a new buyer knows what they're allowed. And we've had recent ones come to the Board of Adjustment, where there is a letter of lawful nonconformity, but the new buyer said, yeah, so what, I'm gonna try to convince people that, yeah, I could have those 5 RVs there,
Do you, when you do the recording, do you include a Google map or something like that to show what's on there? That way you would have proof of,
All we're doing is
What's
recording
that?
1 piece of paper that says there is this letter of lawful nonconformity over at City Hall, you should check it out before you buy it.
okay,
But in there has all the staff detail as to why it did or didn't
okay.
meet they thought it could have 15 units, but we said, no, you can only have 13. So,
Madam Chair?
Yes.
anyway, again, I always have 15-minute answers to
Yeah.
simple.
No, that was good.
But-
Thank you.
Larry,
I appreciate it.
that was
Apologies.
wonderful. What was the outcome of the study that you talked about? What happened to it?
It was presented here at City Council. It is getting fine-tuned through ASU, because it was one part of a Project City study. And they're making it look nice, and they're gonna give us a copy of that study here soon. I can share it with you when we get it, but, it's actually being presented at the State Planning Conference in Tucson, her paper, along with, in September. So,
Madam Chair?
Yes,
So Larry, with over 3,000 manufactured homes not paying any tax, do you feel, or does the team feel that that should be one of the goals that should be stipulated in this section here, instead of just an issue or opportunity as it's stated? Do we feel that it should be a goal that we should actually spend a heck of a lot more time on, just to fill the coffers anyway.
Well, one of the council members had this as an issue. I think it does take, raising it up to council awareness, saying, okay, we want to have a policy that we want to convince our state legislators that, these things should be assessed differently somehow. So, yeah, I think if you want us to come up with some language and bring it back, instead of trying to write it now, we can bring it back at the next meeting.
You guys think, yeah?
I think that's
Yeah, I think
probably
that's a-
worthwhile,
That's a
at least to
good
get
goal.
it in the report here, in the plan.
So maybe,
Because if we're gonna have this, we may as well make sure it's workable.
Right.
Yeah, and
I
identify
think
some
maybe it's
really-
either under the first goal or,
Probably under the first one.
which one?
Probably the first one.
The first goal, we could add another third policy related to the 3,000 units,
Mm-hmm.
and then bring it back at the next meeting.
Okay.
There must be something you could, 3,000 is all.
I think it's a statewide problem.
Yeah.
I think it's a statewide problem.
Well, maybe
Well,
we're the ones that.
Madam
fix it.
Chair, I think it's a statewide problem, but here in Apache Junction, it is a real problem for this city. Maybe some other cities could absorb it a lot better than Apache Junction, but I don't think that's something that this particular city can
Yeah.
absorb very well.
Yeah, there's nothing we can do about it
Yeah.
unless you get legislators to do
Right.
something about it.
Right.
Madam Chair.
So at least having something in here to
Yeah.
raise awareness of it.
Larry, I have one quick question here for you. The xeriscape, whose definition are you using for xeriscaping?
Would be our current landscape ordinance,
Okay,
basically
it's
is a xeriscape.
I mean, as opposed to, you got xeriscape and then you got weeds, so, because it doesn't define it here, it just says that, but you do have a definition if case it,
Yeah, I think
comes
in our
down to
code,
that.
our code also describes which
Okay.
weeds are not, what a weed is.
yeah.
Yeah.
A
Okay.
native plant, a native plant.
Dave?
Yeah, I had a question on this 3,000. When I took the leadership series, we had the fire district chief come in, and he was talking about like the RV parks, to where the way they pay, it's like the whole park just as one owner pays, and not all the individual units in there pay. Is that part of that 3,000 number that we're looking at? Wouldn't that be a much bigger problem than?
Well, again,
Possibly.
it's a commercial enterprise, so it's assessed based on its cash flow, I'm guessing. There's usually 3 ways that you appraise or value property. So one would be the income approach, that's probably how they're paying taxes. The 3,000 units are units that are sitting on their own lot. So it's an acre and a quarter, or it's a 20,000 square foot lot, or whatever it is, those are 3,000 units on city platted, or maybe it wasn't platted, but they're on its own parcel.
Oh, I didn't realize.
Oh,
Yeah,
these
the 3,000 aren't in RV parks, they're
aren't
3,000,
Oh,
yeah, so if you,
That's an even bigger problem, you thought?
yeah.
Problem than we thought.
I thought you were specifically talking about RV parks.
No,
These
I'm
are
sorry.
somebody that has an acre or two and has a mobile home sitting
So
on it.
where exactly,
That whole
because our
northwest
pages
corner
aren't
of
Here,
paginated.
I'm
Tomahawk
gonna pull,
Yeah.
I'm gonna pull it up on the
That's
screen in
almost
front of you,
all
right?
mobile
Yeah,
homes.
every.
Where
yeah,
are you talking?
Yeah,
Southern Tomahawk up to, about 18th. Almost all of those are mobile homes.
they used to be acre lots and they put a mobile home on it.
So if it's a subdivision, I don't know if there's any difference if there's a platted subdivision for a manufactured home, whether they're more likely or not to be affixed or not. But we certainly have homes on an acre and a quarter that they're not affixed. So I think we could clarify this to say on, do we want to say on their own parcel or an individual parcel?
Yeah, not,
Yeah,
or you could put in there, not in a mobile home park or
Yeah, I
something.
think,
Commercial.
Yeah,
I think that-
non-commercial
I think
park
that
or
needs to be
something.
clarified, because I didn't, man, I had no
Yeah, but
idea.
some of those,
Yeah.
don't they like Road Haven, even though you have an RV, they own their own lots?
That's true.
Some of them,
So what was that?
like Road Haven, huh?
People in Roadhaven are starting to affix even park models.
Yeah, and they own their own lots in
So
them.
then they pay property tax on their park model? Well, good for them. So yeah, we'll clarify that this is for, these are individual private ownership, not in a park.
And Madam Chair, I have
Well, I wouldn't say not in park, because what if it's in a park but they own the land? It should apply to them too, no?
But the owner,
That's not what this is identifying,
yeah,
no.
the landowner
Originally,
paying tax.
maybe there's more than 3,000 or whatever, but I think the council member that looked this up, I think, was primarily talking about someone who owns their
Privately
own parcel that's could be in a platted manufactured home subdivision, or it's just sitting on an 1.25 acre lot or a 20,000 square foot lot.
And it's gonna take 10 years before we get this done anyway, so that'll be another goal.
What does places like Dolce Vita do? Do they own
Nope.
their own lots? No, they don't?
No.
Okay.
But when you think about it too, even if the city waved the big policy flag, there's not, what do we get? Because we don't have a property tax.
No.
Yeah,
This benefits the county.
but we might in the future.
Well, in theory, if these 3,000 people started paying property tax, in theory, maybe your property taxes would go down, because then it's a fairness issue. But in reality, the city doesn't have a property tax, but the school, the fire district, and the county would benefit.
Right.
But it's still the county should be rallying
They should
as
have-
well, and the fire district and the
Right.
school district all should be
Absolutely,
rallied behind this.
because they would benefit greatly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it benefits our citizens because we use the school and the fire district and all that.
Yeah,
I have a question.
all right,
Madam
good
Chair.
points.
Just say 200.
You can ask Rudy a question, too. Ask Rudy a question.
You indicate on, just above goals and policies in item 3, completion of neighborhood plans. Rudy, would you define for me what kind of neighborhoods we have in Apache Junction?
What kind of neighborhoods we have?
Yeah, are they named? Do we
Oh,
have them?
yes, yes.
Do we have them outlined on a map?
I think another way to describe them is subdivisions. Of course, we have older subdivisions with minimal improvements, minimum engineering. We have modern subdivisions with retention basins, drainage, streetlights. We have, I think, around 100 or more subdivisions in the city, and in addition to the 125 more or less mobile home parks. And then, of course, we have neighborhoods that are not in platted subdivisions that don't benefit from engineering and drainage. Those are probably the more rural areas. So I would say we have three or four different types.
Okay,
And then we have some areas that, of course, are mostly multifamily clusters of fourplexes and things like that.
thank you.
One of the things we have, too, is primarily there's a map in here about the redevelopment areas. So there is a redevelopment area on the west side of the city, and the city itself tried to create this, and it's referenced in here, the Strong Sustainable Communities Neighborhood Initiative. So there are about 4 neighborhoods that were part of the redevelopment area. So there's like Grand Ocotillo, Maine, which kind of follows the city name, the names of the streets. We did a neighborhood cleanup a year ago with it's a hodgepodge of single-family homes, some mobile home parks, et cetera. Sydney's got the map coming up here, maybe. So basically it relates to, say, south of Apache Trail from Meridian to Ironwood.
Okay.
There's several neighborhoods there's the map in there. So we've done some neighborhood cleanups, so each of those, it's a quarter section, so I can't really use the mouse, but, so from Broadway to 16th, from Meridian to Delaware, that's one neighborhood, that Warner Cedar area. And then, here we go, and then, so that we've given a name for this area. This one is, I want to say, may include Grand Ocotillo, Maine.
Yes.
And then we have this one, and we did a neighborhood cleanup here. So those are 4 that I'm talking about are more distinctive than other developments or subdivisions or mobile home parks. So this is not in the redevelopment area, so it's not, those are really kind of where the same housing character is, so we've kind of just geographically kind of made those as
These are,
neighborhood focus areas, but we don't have neighborhood plans. So, for example, behind the dog park area, that was the first from about Fifth Avenue down to Broadway, from Delaware to Meridian. We had a neighborhood meeting, we did surveys we sent out. They gave us some of their concerns in terms of trash, lighting, and the city went in and did 2 neighborhood cleanups and installed some solar lights in the neighborhood. So we don't have a formal neighborhood revitalization program, and maybe that's kind of what the element is kind of getting at, is do we formalize it? Are there some neighborhoods where we would start and do some more definitive neighborhood plans?
So this is the, what you would call the near downtown sort of, near downtown-like area?
Yes, I think
Okay.
there is a, what's the, Apache Trail redevelopment area that includes those 3 neighborhoods, or 4 neighborhoods.
Anyone else regarding this chapter? It's our last chapter that we're going to review tonight.
Still got time for a bit.
Is that enough? You want to keep going?
No, thank you. No, thank you.
So I think everybody's homework, especially you, Mike, is to go find downtown. And we'll start with chapter 4 next time, all of us.
Downtown is pretty darn big according to these maps.
Yeah. So what are we gonna do next time? This Thursday,
We'll
right?
start with chapter 4 this Thursday.
Correct. So we'll start with chapter 4, and we'll hopefully review up to chapter 6 next meeting.
4 and 6?
4, 5, and 6?
4, 5, and 6. Yeah.
4, 5, and 6. That's our homework.
Yeah. Commission, something that I've heard a lot tonight is the necessity of definitions. So
Yeah.
going forward, I'll be putting together a chapter that I'll put in the end with kind of a common questions and definitions noted. So,
Acronyms or whatever.
yeah, exactly.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, I really, because,
would
you
be
know, there's
helpful.
always gonna be that argument, you know, of who's,
Who's the audience, right?
Whose definition?
Merriam-Webster's or somebody, you know,
Right.
else.
Whose definition
Whose
are we using?
definition are you using? Yes.
So I might not have it for next Thursday, but I'll have it for meetings going forward.
It can build as we come up with
Absolutely.
these things. Yeah.
Can I make a suggestion for going forward?
Yeah.
Some of these maps that we got like 2 crammed on 1 page, maybe make it 1 page so we can read them a little clearer.
Sure.
Okay, is that it, everybody? Any questions, anything? Then, we already did that, so unless, do we need to select future dates on tonight?
No, we're set up
We're
for
already
next
set.
Thursday, the
First,
1st,
this coming up Thursday.
this coming Thursday, and the following Thursday on the 8th.
Okay.
So those, you
Then,
should have gotten those agendas in the mail for this Thursday
Yeah.
and the following Thursday.
yeah,
We did.
okay,
And then the idea was on the 13th, at the next regular P and Z meeting, depending on where we are, you could,
9 o'clock, yeah. okay.
you could schedule out, no, not that night, I'm saying that night, you could set future meeting date
yeah,
on the 13th for a future Thursday, or 2, depending on where you're at.
whenever. Okay.
So there's no
then-
need to set any dates tonight.
Then if I hear no objection, I will cancel. I will adjourn this meeting at 8:15.
I could use some counsel.
No,
Council,
yes, that's right. We don't want to cancel.
Thank you for your help, Commission.
Very good. Thank